creating the most stability for the tripod of the foot. That can be a little bit less indicative of maybe overall form quality. It's going to hold you back a little bit in regards to floor support, etc. So I don't ever say like you have to wear a shoe or go barefoot when you're squatting, but I definitely would recommend it for most people, to be honest with you, unless you're wearing like a super minimal shoe. Like I would squat in these probably, like that wouldn't bother me a whole lot, but it does tilt my toes up a little bit. I can feel like my toes are a little bit more lifted in this shoe, whereas if I take that off and I look here, so I have a fairly high arch here, positioning just naturally. Some people would argue like maybe I need the arch support or whatever it may be. No, like I just need to be able to control this side of my foot so that this side of my foot doesn't collapse in as I'm squatting. Make sense? So it is a control thing on this side of my body to control that arch. It is not necessarily, I always go back to like innate human patterns, right? Like we are a hunter-gatherer species. We are a species that was able to run and hunt and do all the things with our feet without arch supports at some point in our lives. So being able to utilize your God-given anatomy and optimize those ways and optimize those movements in ways that can actually like translate into true strength. Okay, so tripod of the foot is what you want to be focused on in a squat. So you've got 2 points of contact through the balls of your feet, and then your heel in contact with the floor. So we've got the tripod 1, 2, 3 of the foot in contact here. Toes should not be gripping the floor. They should not be arching up. I see a lot of people as they're going into a squat positioning, like trying to keep the weight in their heels, so like bring their toes up. That's not necessarily good either. We want full contact of the foot with the floor. So yes, I have a high arch, but I can maintain full contact with the floor and still not let those knees collapse, right? If I was not able to control that full tripod, you would see this, like where my ankles are gonna kind of cave in. I have to be intentional about finding the tripod, 1, 2, 3, and I can feel full contact with the floor there, okay? So on a deadlift and on a squat positioning, I definitely recommend staying as close to the floor as you can, meaning shoes are questionable, if not, probably not the best idea, okay? Because if I'm in a running shoe, a lot of running shoes actually kick you up, so they'll kick your toes up because they want you like tilting forward as you're running, okay? So a lot of times they're pulling you back and they're pulling your center of gravity some way or direction, okay? The hope is that when you're barefoot, your center of gravity is completely centered through the tripod of the foot. So you've got full contact and full awareness with the floor, okay? Questions on that at all? Everyone try it? I'm just gonna watch the way you stand a little bit here. That feel any different without the shoe on, standing in this position? A little bit, you're a little bit tilted in just a smidge, you feel that? So trying to find like the outside of your feet a little bit. So the full contact of the foot should be, or full surface of the foot should be in contact with the floor. Cool? Does that make sense? Do you feel stable here? Do you feel unstable? Anybody? Okay? Okay, so that's the foot, right? Stance, we'll go into a little bit more once we go through work our way up through the body. But stance is going to vary depending on the person, obviously, and a lot of it depends on that knee and arch positioning here, okay? Second thing we look at from the feet is we look at the ankles. So ankle mobility is definitely something that holds a lot of people back on squats. For women, we don't see a lot of this just because women are fairly mobile anyway. But there are a few of us that it pops up where we're like, okay, we need to work on a little bit of ankle mobility. So one of the ways that we screen that is to come to wall, surface. You can use the side of the rig for this too. But if you take like a foot step back, okay, and then bring your foot here, the goal is to be able to reach your knee to the surface in front of you without raising your heel. So it should be, mine is about inches away from the surface.
Is it a full foot with your
If your feet are, I do like a half five. The maximum you want to go past is about 6 inches. So yeah. There you go. A little bit of ankle stuff though. Did you know that? Oh, then that would do it. Yeah, if you've sprained an ankle or had any like foot injuries or anything like that, this can be a little bit more challenging in the past. Yep, so you want to be about, beautiful. You want to be about 4 or 5 inches away, be able to get that knee all the way to that surface with keeping your heel down. Can you keep your heel down? Yes, there you go. Ooh, a little bit in there. Okay, pause. Kayla, can I pick on you?
Yes.
Okay, so, oh, thank God, that sound. All right, so Kayla here, back up just a little bit and square your hips like towards the rig. Yeah, and then bring this foot out here. A little bit more. There you go. Okay, you can hold on to it if you want, the rig. Yep, and then reach that knee towards the surface. See how that ankle just does not want to come up, right? It like doesn't want to give her that range of motion, right? Okay. So ideally, that would be indicative of like, obviously she's got some ankle tightness and ankle range of motion mobility in there. So what I would do watching that is I would give Kayla some stretches. First thing I would have Kayla do is probably come to a bench, and she's going to set up, foot is on the bench, and you can kind of go into kneeling position here, and then you're intentionally putting your weight and pushing on that knee, so and keeping the heel in contact with the floor. Obviously, if you get into this position, we're not going to get as much of a stretch, right? So you're keeping your heel on the floor and getting into this position, stretching or putting weight onto the back of that ankle, pulling you forward here, okay? And I would do it both sides. Give yourself a little bit here, or if you want, you could even do, like if you're using a taller box, you could use a kettlebell on top of that knee and hold that kettlebell on top of the knee to push the knee forward. Make sense?
Is that our like banded ankle mobility?
Yes, another one is the banded ankle mobility that Liz will have you do every once in a while. So if you wrap a band around here, step into that band, and then you're pulling yourself forward here, or you can even kneel and pull yourself forward here. So the band is pulling traction back, and you're pulling, it's usually wrapped like, you want it down around the ankle here, okay? One thing to mention here though, is if the movement is inhibited by lack of mobility, that's okay. That's something that we can work through. That's do this stretch, do the ankle mobility stretch, banded mobility stretch. If it is an owie, like sharp, like impingement pain, that's a different conversation, okay? We can stretch through a mobility thing. We cannot stretch through an impingement, okay? So if this is causing like a owie, like that sharp pain, that is definitely more of a referral situation where we would say, okay, like maybe we need a PT involved or something along those lines, because maybe a joint is just not in the right place or something along those lines. So impingement versus like range of motion, definitely something to be aware of there, okay? But for the most part, so if you feel like that stretch was very challenging for you or you weren't able to fully get there, adding in those weighted knee stretches, adding in the banded knee stretches or ankle stretches more. Calf strength can also be part of that. So doing, yes, calf raises, but also the tibia raises. So here, pulling up, pulling toes towards you. Here is going to also strengthen and lengthen those ankles. So as much as sometimes the lack of mobility is from tightness, it can also be from weakness. Okay, tight and weak can be two things can be true at the same time. Make sense? Okay, so that's ankles. Knees are probably the least worrisome in regards to they only have really one movement pattern. They're going to flex and extend, right? They rotate just a smidge, but they're not our stabilizing joint. The knee will move where the hips are moving and what the ankles are doing. So if somebody's coming to us and saying like, I have a lot of knee pain, 9 times out of 10, it is not your knees, it's in your hips or it's in your ankle that's actually, something's going off here. A lot of times it's in the hips. Most of the time it's in the hips, but sometimes it can be the ankles. So the first thing we usually check is hips, then we'll move to ankles after that, okay? So with the knees, though, on the squat positioning, we wanna make sure that they're going externally rotated, but I don't want you to like drive your knees out, okay? I want you to actually think like you're rooting to the floor and like your tree trunks with your legs are like rooting into the floor, driving the knees out over the pinky toes or over the toes. You're not letting them go straight. So if you think about rooting to the floor and like rotating those legs down, your knees just kind of naturally drive out, right? You can feel that kind of, they just, whoop, they drive. So really adding in, by doing that, if you give yourself that cue, what else are we using to stabilize? If I say rooting to the floor and your legs are tree trunks to the floor, what else are you turning on? Glutes, right? Your hip muscles, like for sure, all of these hip stabilizing muscles all of a sudden turn on to give you that range of motion. But I feel it in my feet too, right? Like you're getting all 3 points of, or as far as like joint mobility, joint movement, all 3 of them are turning on to stabilize you there, okay? So knees should be going externally out slightly. Does not have to be wide here, okay? We don't love that. Does not have to be, and shouldn't be here. Don't love that either, okay? But nice neutral stance should give you that slight external rotation if you're really thinking about rooting to the floor.
Should your feet be out a little bit or just straight? Like
I like to externally rotate as women, which let's just go into hips since we're there. As women, our Q angle is wider. So the Q angle of our hips here, meaning it's a more like this, whereas men's are more like this, okay? Men are like this, we're more like this, okay? So when we externally rotate the toes slightly, it's giving us more range of motion to be able to get down there and avoid impingement. Because if you're gonna squat more here, if you visualize your hip like this and you're coming down, you're not getting as much range of motion out of that angle. If I rotate here, I'm getting a lot more range of motion out of that. Make sense? Also, I mean, for the most part, men should mostly squat that way too. Really, a lot of people will argue you're strongest when your like feet are forward and you've got all that force, full contact with the floor. But really, even in this position, you should still have full contact with the floor through your feet, okay? Other thing on that is like, if you think about hunter-gatherer species that we are, in this position here is where we should be able to essentially live and hang out, okay? So from a hip mobility, ankle mobility standpoint, being able to get down here into the bottom of the squat, and this can kind of, this position here can also show you what your squat stance should kind of look like, okay? If you can get down here and then kind of like heel toe yourself into a position that you feel fairly comfortable and then stand up, that's my squat stance. Set that down. Which down there is uncomfortable, right? Okay, so that's your squat setup position. Is if this is the bottom of your squat and you're able to like feel fairly comfortable here, externally rotated slightly, that's my squat stance as I'm going to do the actual barbell squats. Cool? Okay, hips. Hips are big with obviously squats. One thing that I want you to think about on squats with hips is that this is your power source. So we talk a lot about hinging using your hips, kettlebell swings, all of these different hinge movement patterns, deadlifts, all those things, using your hips for your power. Your squat is also a hip-powered movement, okay? Yes, it's knee flexion and extension, and we've got some ankle flexion extension in there, but the hip is where the power source is coming from. So a lot of people think about legs or using quads or any other movement pattern here. But when you're doing a squat, your hip drive is what's getting you out of the bottom of that squat. Okay? It is not a hip drive this direction, but it is still a hip drive pulling you up and pushing the floor away. okay? So your hips, number one, need to be mobile, they need to be stable, they need to be both, okay? We don't want them like locked, but we also don't want them like loosey-goosey able to move around a ton, okay? So within hips, a lot of times what we see as far as it affecting squats is the front of the anterior pelvis positioning. So if your pelvis is pulling forward or tilting forward, think of it as a bucket if it's pulling forward. These are usually pretty tight. So your hip flexors are gonna be super tight if we see this happening a lot on the squat. So being able to stretch those out and getting range of motion through that, if you sit up for work or you're sitting a lot just in your daily life, these get shortened and weakened, okay? So we need to strengthen and lengthen these muscles in here. So those hip opening exercises, like just as simple as like a cow stretch or a single leg, squeezing the glutes and opening up that hip, even throwing in a little bit of a chest opening in there. But the more you're activating and squeezing here or doing those stretches to open the front of the hip, the better those squats are gonna feel for you, okay? Especially again, if you're pretty sedentary. That being said, in this position, it is not just a lean forward when you're doing these hip flexor stretches, it is a glute squeeze. That's where that lengthening is gonna come from, okay? This can help a little bit. Yes, I'm getting a little bit deeper stretch, but if I squeeze more, I get a better stretch, okay? So really focusing on hip mobility or opening up here. So try it out, a couple seconds each side. Ooh, that hurts my knee. We'll go here. Squeezing the glute. Squeeze forward. Maybe come forward slightly, then squeeze again. Come forward slightly, squeeze again. Do you feel that through the front of the glute, or front of the hip? Okay, other side. This is kind of the front of your glute, technically speaking. But glute doesn't really have a front side.
It's just on the inside.
No, it's just hanging out in there. You should feel this kind of down into your quad, too.
The stretch makes like which side is tighter very obvious.
Yep.
Very obvious.
Yep. It'll show you
Yeah.
real quick. So these types of stretches are great for like a post-workout. So isolated stretches are really good for like a post-workout stimulus where your body's already warm, where you're isolating and holding. Dynamic stretches are always going to be better as you're warming up to a squat or as you're warming up to a movement. So doing more of like a dynamic stretch where we're like moving the muscle through contraction and extension is going to be a lot better than just an isometric hold ahead of a squat or ahead of any movement pattern. We want blood flow moving in and out, not just like isolating there, okay? That's one. I could show you a movement screening on that, but honestly, like everybody's pretty different. I feel like everybody kind of defaults to tight front of hips for the most part. So just watching that and being aware of those positionings are for sure super important. Does anybody notice in their squat stance if they don't set up like completely even?
Yes.
Do you notice that?
Yes. What do you mean?
Yeah, what do you mean?
So for me, a lot of times I'll notice that my right foot is a little bit behind my left foot. Like I'm a little bit like this.
Yes.
I notice
Yeah.
I'm externally rotated more on my left foot.
More on your left than your right. Anybody else?
Hips that do that?
Hmm?
Why does that happen?
It's in your hips,
Okay.
Yep. So I don't want to say it's necessarily good or bad. I think bringing awareness to it, number one, can you keep your feet nice and even and still get through a full range of motion squat? So if I like just naturally set up and don't look at my feet and like go off of what feels good, that feels good for me. I look down and I'm like, whoops, I'm like way this way, right? So there's two trains of thought on this. Do we just let it ride and this is your body's anatomy and this is kind of like the way that your body is set up, okay? Or is that a referral situation? Because a lot of times what can be happening is that one femur is externally rotating a little bit, or your pelvis is slightly externally, like, so that in this scenario, for example, for me, my femur is coming this direction, so it's pulling my hip back. So this hip is back and this is forward. Okay, makes sense? So if it's not bothering you and it's not like causing a whole lot of issues, I wouldn't say like, you know, to change anything necessarily, but just being aware of it, like being aware of that movement pattern and trying to make sure that you're setting up in a normal, like in a neutral stance. But you might feel like when you do that, like the squats might feel a little bit different, right? Like you're like, oh, my hips don't love that, right? If I just go with what feels good in my normal stance, that feels great. But I could be using one side maybe a little bit more than another, those types of things. And that's where a physical therapist really comes into play in regards to like watching your movement patterns and tweaking what they think they need to tweak or just leave alone, okay? But from a movement pattern, as far as coaching side of things, obviously symmetry is ideal, right? Questions on that at all? Okay, low back. Low back is one of the things that we see probably more than anything in regards to troubleshooting the squat. Low back should stay nice and neutral. So rib cage and pelvis should stay nice and connected. I'm not posterior tilting or like tilting my pelvis under here, but I'm also not letting my rib cage flare or my pelvis come down as I squat. This should be neutral. So if you watch, my rib cage and pelvis stay stacked, my hips go back, I squat, I stand it up. This stays stacked, I squat, I stand it up. Okay, this is staying together. I'm not tilting and coming up. Or what we'll see is they'll stay neutral and then I tilt to get it up. Okay, does that make sense? So here, movement, and if your low back and your lumbar spine should be mobile, okay? It should be stable, but it should be mobile, right? You want mobility through the spine, through the upper spine more than anything. Your low back, we want it to be stable. So the thoracic spine should have mobility, the lumbar spine should have stability. That being said, it can move as long as it's not well loaded, okay? So for example, I can do this without hurting my back here, right? Like I can squeeze, I can arch, I can do whatever I want, unloaded. But if you load it and move while you're loaded, that's where injury occurs, right? That's where the issues happen. So when you're thinking about these positioning, or the stabilizing positions of the squat here, we don't want to move under load, okay? We want to create stability under load and maintain that. I use the example of like a deadlift. If you set up in a deadlift like this and don't move, you could probably not hurt yourself, right? Because you've maintained the stability of the position that you've created and you've moved the deadlift from there. Do I think that's smart? No, don't do that. But, and this, stable, 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 probably won't hurt you as much as that is gonna hurt you, okay? So in a back squat, whatever positioning you find, which ideally obviously is gonna be rib cage, pelvis under load, you're here, exhale, stand it up. What's going to cause an issue is if you flare under load, or you're going down, or you're posterior tilting one way or the other under load, okay? So it's a stability thing. You wanna be able to control that full range of motion the entire time, okay? For those of you that are taller or have longer femurs, this may look different. So for me, I can keep my chest fairly neutral and squat. Like I can keep my chest fairly upright. If I really tried, I could probably keep it essentially completely upright, right? For those of you with longer femurs, that is a lot harder for you to do. Here's why. If you look at the bottom of my, or the top of my hip is like right here, okay? Like my iliac crest is like right there to my knee. Fairly long femur, but I wouldn't say it's like super long compared to the bottom part of my leg, right? Like if you look at the length of my tibia fibia down there, it's not so bad, okay? a much longer femur, right? Like if we stand next to each other and we're, how much taller than me? Not like I'm taller than you, but you're taller. But the top of your hip is here, okay? So her femur is a solid like 2 or 3 inches longer than mine, okay? So for her to maintain that same positioning, that is not going to go well because your angle is different. So if you think about it from the side here, the height of her femur is like here. So for her to get back into a squat and still keep her chest upright, she's having to like really lean over with her chest, right? Does that make sense? Okay? So the goal with the squat is that we keep the weight through the middle of the body. So if you're doing a back squat or a front squat. Why this matters in regards to like QL angle or femur length is if we're in a back squat here and she's having to hinge, look how far forward that bar is going for her to get back. So if we're here, imagine that is nice and long. I'm having to like get this direction to get into a squat, right? Does that feel like that for you? Yeah. The biggest thing that scares me here is the neck, which we'll get to. But if I move this down a little bit lower onto my back, and I have that nice long angle, look what happens. Right? It stays through the midline of the body. Okay? So for air squats, those types of things, never be afraid, anybody, never be afraid to let that chest come with you. Okay? Your low back, rib cage, pelvis stay connected. Your chest comes with you into that angle, but it's not trying to stay upright. You're not trying to puff your chest. So if you've ever heard that, you like puff your chest on a squat. We're not puffing our chest here, okay? We're keeping the rib cage, pelvis positioning neutral, and then we're coming down, exhaling. I just want to see.
Is there any difference between a front and back squat and how like the angle should be? 'Cause, like
No.
front squat, like I always feel like I'm a little bit more upright than I am on my back squat.
Yes, which is normal. You should be able to be.
Yeah.
But overall, the bar path should stay the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the bar path should stay through the midline of the foot on the front squat and on the back squat. On front squats, we see a lot of like this start to happen. So really pulling back and staying more upright on the front squat. On the back squat, we see a lot of this start to happen, but it's on your back, so it's pulling you forward. Good. Widen your stance just a smidge. Yeah, there you go. Good. Don't hold quite as low. There you go. Yep. There you go. Okay. Do you see the other thing that she was doing at first? Just don't push the floor away. Don't do anything. Just turn slightly this way. Other way. Sorry. And then do the squat. Do you see what's happening? Yep. Which way? So your posterior is tilting at the bottom. So at the bottom of the squat, your butt is almost on the floor. Yeah. So I want you to think as you're going through this next one, think rooting to the floor like we did with the legs, right? Think root to the floor. Drive your knees nice and solid over those toes. Okay? Yes. There you go. Root to the floor. There you go. There you go. See how that went away? Okay? A lot of that was just getting her hips to stabilize. Yes. Much better. Okay? Bar path look good? Yes? Do you normally low bar? Like you put the bars around your back? Okay. So with the position of comfortability there, that just might take a little bit of time to get used to. Because when you're in this position, ideally you want to be like here and you're almost breaking the bar this way. So you're breaking it, like you're pulling it towards you. Yeah. This way. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're pulling it down and like towards you in this position and getting those elbows as close to your sides as you can. So that this unit stays nice and locked and the chest and the rib cage can just fall. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. Questions on this at all? Okay. So low back should not move under tension, should not move under load. You're stabilizing by breathing 360 degrees, creating that tension of the core 360 60 degrees. If you've done it correctly, you've just now created your own inner weightlifting belt. You're coming down and you're exhaling up out of the bottom of the squat, okay? Your upper back, your thoracic back should be mobile. This is a part of the body that we should have mobility through the upper back. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily mobilizing while you're squatting, but you should have range of motion enough to be able to get your shoulders back and get your hands as close to your shoulders as possible. We see a lot of people set up on a squat like this, here, okay? It's fine, it's not gonna hurt you, but I have no upper back activation in this position. I am not using my upper back in any way, shape, or form. So we want you to have enough mobility that you can get those hands to your shoulders and activate that upper back, okay? So like if you feel the difference between this and this on yourself, it is a huge difference of stability and strength that you're stabilizing through your upper back, okay? This bar gets very heavy, okay? I lift more than my body weight. There are a lot of women in here that lift more than their body weight for multiple reps. So just setting it on your back and not actively supporting yourself with your upper back is imperative from like a longevity standpoint, but also from a performance standpoint. Like you're gonna be a lot stronger activated through that upper back than you are here and just letting it like hang on your back. Sometimes that's the hardest part of the squat. It's like, it's just heavy on my back. My legs can handle it, but it's just heavy. It feels very heavy on my back, right? So staying nice and active, pulling your shoulder blades down and back, and pulling those elbows towards your side. And again, it's almost like I'm breaking the bar this way. This way, okay? I'm active, squeeze, 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 squeeze. Exhale, push that floor away. Exhale, push that floor away. Last thing on this movement here is my neck positioning, okay? When we're here, neck isn't always, or it is always in line with spine. No point to you doing this for anything. Other people in the past, I've heard squat cues of like, look up, don't look up. Don't do that, okay? You want neck in line with spine, neck neutral, neck follows spine as it comes up to stand, okay? If you're looking up, not only are you creating these neck extensors here, you're also probably tilting your low back, okay? Because usually, whatever your neck is doing, your low back is usually following suit. So even on like a kettlebell swing deadlifts, if you hear me coach deadlifts, I am constantly like tuck your chin, tuck your chin, tuck your chin, look at the floor, neck in line with spine, constant, because a lot of times, if you're here, your neck in line with spine, the second you look up, watch what happens to my back. I look down, I look up, I look down. Literally, I'm not doing anything. I'm not changing anything. All I'm doing is moving my neck, right? And you can see how my back changes. It looks flat in both positions, but you can see I'm using my erectors more in that position versus not, right? Okay? So from our perspective, you look like you have a flat back, but you're creating your neck. So therefore, you're using your low back muscles more than maybe you should be, okay? Same thing on the squat, right? Here, neck in line with spine, stay, exhale up. Exhale up, okay? If it's super heavy and you're going like this, we're causing issues there, okay? So do not be afraid to look down or just let your chest come with you. Your upper body is this nice, like stable hip, torso, neck, stability figure on top as your legs are doing the squat. And it's just moving with you. Make sense on that side?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Kind of more related to, I think, the lower back part of it. But I know I hurt myself because I flared out, and that was like all the way went to my lower back. So I try to think a little bit more of like tucking in, but I'm not like.
You're probably going to neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I know it's probably not supposed to be like you're tucking that in, but that's just forcing me to like make sure to flare out. So
Yep.
is that okay? to do?
Yeah, as long as you're able to breathe into it and be able to stabilize it and it feels okay, that's a cue that you're having to use to not do a movement pattern that was there before, right? It's not a movement pattern, or it's not a cue that I would give to everybody, right? But but because you know you're aware of that, like I have to actually sometimes think like neutral. I almost have to think posterior a little bit, like same thing. Like I'm almost posterior tilting to make sure I'm staying neutral.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not, but I feel
Yeah.
like I kind of have to like give myself that cue.
Overcompensate a little bit to
Right,
get neutral.
right. Or even just think like a rib cage stacked, pelvis stacked, root to the floor. Oh shit, everything takes care of itself, right? Like as simple as that, like rooting to the floor, everything takes care of itself. You'll hear from a movement pattern standpoint with the bar positioning, you'll hear some cues and other places give like weight in your heels, get your weight back. All they're trying to do is move your bar back. So if you need to move your bar down on your back a little bit to get that movement pattern back into the midline of the body, because we'll see this, you know, like as the weight gets heavy, like it's pulling you forward. If your tripod is in contact with the floor, your legs are engaged, your rib cage and pelvis is positioned correctly, and you're still leaning forward, all we need to do is move that bar down. Okay, so just moving the bar on your back down a little bit. A lot of people with long femurs actually feel more comfortable under a front squat. Do you feel that way? Besides the arm thing and the hand thing.
Yeah.
A lot of them feel more comfortable because this angle is a lot easier for them to stay more upright in. Versus like feeling like they're almost doing like, almost feels deadlift-ish or like good morning-ish. Okay? But once we move that bar down, it should mitigate some of that. What other questions do you have? Okay, let's everybody get a bar really quick. I just want to show you what I meant by the hip drive with a little cue really fast, and then I'll stick around and answer questions or whatever, but if you need to go. So what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to use Tiff for a demo here real quick. So she's going to get under the bar. First things first here is she's got her hands right outside the shoulders and her back is nice and active. So if I like grab in here, I can feel like all of this is turned on. Okay, she's not just like loosey-goosey with the bar setting on her back. She's nice and active and stable, and then her rib cage and pelvis positioning are stacked. So I can feel her rib cage and I can feel where her pelvis is, and we've got that nice and neutral and stacked. So she's gonna exhale to lift off, come back, find her stance, okay? She's gonna inhale, come down, exhale, come up, good. Inhale, come down, exhale, come up, good. So she likes to do a little squeeze of her pelvis forward. Do you notice that on one of those? It's a movement pattern we're working on. Okay? She squeezes in at the top. For her, I would just say push the floor, I stand up. You don't have to squeeze. I mean, yes, squeeze your butt when you get to the top, but it's not a squeeze forward. It's just a stand up and squeeze. Good. Sorry, you're probably really sore. Okay, one more. Okay, now I'm gonna put my hand on her low back. Push me away. Feel that hip drive, okay? Do it again. Good. Do it again. You feel the hip drive difference there? Good. So by putting I'm just gonna come around and I'm gonna put my hand like on your sternum here, or sternum. On your sacrum.